Good morning, Jeremy.
Now we're going back to the Pioneer Board this morning in our history spot. We've stepped away from it for the past few weeks. Give it a rest to enjoy its, let it relax and slip back into its new surroundings after it's been restored. But you're going to knock off a few names on the board this morning.
Yes, I thought, well, while we're back at the Pioneer Board, we'll gather together a whole row of people, and I'm going to be talking about the Bostock family. One of the names, if you travel around this district a lot, the Bostock name keeps coming up in locations. So there's Bostock Street in Warrnambool, Bostock's Road or Lane and sort of Coorumuk, Woolsthorpe area.
Right, yeah.
Bostock's Creek near Cobden, and there's an avenue in Geelong, and they all relate to various members of this family who are represented on the board by 6 people.
Right.
The original Bostock these people are descended from came to New South Wales as a convict in 1813. His name was Robert Bostock. He was a seafarer, and he'd been convicted in Sierra Leone of slave trading and transported. But he received a free pardon the following year from Governor Macquarie and went back to England, but then came out pretty soon after that to Tasmania, where he was in charge of the commissariat stores on the waterfront. He married Rachel Rhodes in Tasmania, and they then selected land in Tasmania, a property called Vaucluse, and there they had 8 children, 5 boys and 3 girls, all born in Tasmania. But as young men and some circumstances women, they came over here. So on the Pioneer Board, we've got Augustus, who arrived in the district in 1853. And he leased land at Grasmere from Thomas Manifold, and he married Margaret Aitken, who was the daughter of J.W.M. Aitken. Now, Thomas Manifold and Aitken are also on the board, next to the Bostocks. So there's a whole row of these people on the board altogether.
Right.
The 3 Manifold brothers, J.W.M. Aitken and the 6 Bostocks, are probably submitted at the same time, so they're right in the middle of the board.
So they're all together, yeah.
So Gus Bostock was very active in the formation of the early Roads Board, and he was later a member of the Shire Council. And he had extensive land holdings throughout the districts in and around that sort of, mainly that Grasmere area and the parish of Merai, but his name crops up everywhere. He's interesting to us because throughout his time as a pastoralist and a grazier and a cultivator of land, he kept extensive diaries, and we have copies of the diaries at the Historical Society, and they really make very interesting reading, and they're very detailed account of farming in the area at the time. Ernest also arrived in Warrnambool in 1853. Some sources say earlier. It's a bit hard to tell. And he married Lucy Aitken, who's a daughter of J.W.M. Aitken. Augustus was married to Margaret Aitken, and so his brother marries Lucy Aitken, another daughter. And Ernest was in partnership with his father-in-law in a flour mill and bond store in Warrnambool. The Manifold and Aitken, there were several flour mills in Warrnambool in the early days because people were growing wheat in the district. The Manifold and Aitken one was the one up in Merai Street near the corner of Banyan Street. It's not there anymore. And also in a partnership in bond stores where... and he was very active in local affairs as well. He was a Shire councillor and he was Shire president. And he, as I said, married Lucy Aitken, and they lived at Liphook, which they built that house. It's now in Liphook Crescent, was then on the Port Fairy Road. Now it's in West Warrnambool, but the house is still there. George was the eldest son, and he came in the early 1840s, a little bit earlier than his brother, and he was first employed by William Rutledge at Port Fairy to board all the ships and inspector of cargoes, and worked in the harbour there. And he married Anne Cox, who was the sister of John Cox, who had the first store in Port Fairy. So this is at very early days in Port Fairy. And then he took over the Umarella West pastoral run, and he was very busy in lots of businesses throughout the area. He was also into flour milling, and he built the flour mill at Mortlake, the bluestone mill that still stands.
Oh, okay, it's still there, yeah.
And he was an active partner in the Manifold and Aitken bond store and flour mill in Warrnambool. The bond store was demolished. It was derelict by the time it was demolished in the 1930s to make way for the Civic Green. So that's where the bond store was, right in the middle of town. James came to the area in about 1845. He was the youngest son, and guess whose daughter he married? J.W.M. Aitken.
Right,
yes.
okay.
So he married Alice Aitken, and so 3 brothers married 3 sisters.
Sisters, wow.
He was a land agent and moneylender in early Warrnambool when there weren't many banks, and banks early on weren't as well established, and people needed money on account, and there's lots of shenanigans went on, but people who could finance other people were very highly sought after.
Yes.
He was also very interested in horse racing. He was on the first committee of the first turf club and secretary later on of the subsequent racing club. Some sources say that the Bostock Street we have in Warrnambool was named specifically after him, but again, it's a bit hard to tell. The last son of the family, T.E. or Thomas Edward Bostock, came to Port Fairy in 1848, and later he had various different pastoral runs around the area, Jalalabad at Darlington, Grasmere and Rose Hill on the Merai River Valley at Grasmere, and Bortcoy. And he married Catherine Mackesy, and the Mackesy family had land north of Hamilton at Cavendish, and the Mackeseys and the Bostocks travelled a lot up and down to each other's pastoral runs, and the Mackeseys also kept extensive diaries, and they really make fascinating reading. The Mackeseys are always coming down to Warrnambool for the races, and they talk about who they're staying with on the way, and when they're doing dipping sheep, or some of the Mackesy stories about travelling to Melbourne and taking overland weeks to get there, having to arriving at a flooded creek and waiting 2 weeks for it to come down so they could cross. They're really interesting stories. T.E. Bostock had a son also called Thomas Edward Bostock, who worked in the Bank of Australasia in Warrnambool, and during that time played both cricket and football. He was a very keen cricketer and footballer, and in our collection one of our favourite items is a small men's locket designed to go onto a watch chain and carrying little photos, and it was presented by the cricket club when he left to go to Geelong to live. The 6th Bostock on the board, Edward Robe Bostock, was a cousin of the family. He was a landowner in Van Diemen's Land and came across to Victoria on various runs, and he lived at Jalalabad for a while. He married another Mackesy daughter, Mary, and then they went back to England, and he was their London agent, so all the other family that were, growing things and exporting them and dealing with various different aspects of their business. He was the agent in London who took care of all of that. And he also, some of the subsequent generation, when they went back to school, they were sent back to school in England, and so Edward managed all of that and looked after them. So they're an interesting bunch of people, and as I say, you can't travel very far in this area without coming across the name. And I just find it interesting that they're all there, all in a row. 3 manifolds, J.W.M. Aitken, who married a manifold, and then the Bostocks.
Yeah, right. And probably plenty of relatives, I would imagine, still in this district today.
There are a lot of relatives about. A lot of relatives in Tasmania, because some of the family married and stayed there. Some of the 3 girls married and lived in other parts of Victoria. So, it's quite an interesting clan.
Yeah, indeed. Janet, thanks again very much.
Thank you.